honestly had another meltdown. Anything you can think of, I was trying and I was doing to try to build my supply. Hi everyone, my name is Skye and I'm a first-time mum to a beautiful baby girl. Throughout my channel, I talk about all things motherhood, so pregnancy, labor, birth, postpartum, and everything else in between. This topic is so close to my heart. Even when I was writing down some of the things that I'm going to be talking about today, I got a little bit emotional just thinking of that time and how I felt, and yeah, all the emotions that I was feeling at that time kind of come rushing back. So I hope this video is going to help you through your breastfeeding journey. I thought because I did a breastfeeding course that my breastfeeding journey would be smooth sailing, and I was so wrong. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing my breastfeeding journey, how it began, where it's at now, and I'm also going to be giving you some tips that I wish that I had have known prior to going into my breastfeeding journey, because I do truly think it would have made a significant difference at the very beginning. I do just want to do a quick disclaimer and say that this is my journey and my experience through breastfeeding. I have no judgment in how anyone decides to feed their baby. You need to do what's right for your family and your baby. If you watched my previous videos, you'll know that breastfeeding was super important to me and it was something that I really wanted to do. I did a breastfeeding course. I did quite a bit of research on sort of what happens. So I thought that I was pretty prepared going into my breastfeeding journey. So let's start right at the beginning, and this is at 37 weeks. So for me personally, what I wanted to do, and that was express colostrum prior to giving birth. So the reason why I wanted to do this, and that was just to have a couple of syringes ready to go in case my daughter couldn't latch, or if I had a cesarean, then I might not have been able to breastfeed right away. So I wanted the colostrum there ready to go, just in case I wasn't able to feed for whatever situation was going to arise. I started to hand express. I got the syringes ready and I was ready to go, and nothing came out. Now, I was a little bit disappointed, but I thought, oh, it's only the first time. Let's just, try again. So I tried again, nothing, and again. And I continued trying to hand express right up until I gave birth, and I couldn't get any colostrum out. Now, that in itself just put that doubt in my mind that maybe I was going to have a supply issue, which again, if you can't express colostrum prior to giving birth, it's also not an indication that you're going to have a low supply. This is just what I wanted to do. But then because I was doing this and none was coming out, I then got in my head thinking, okay, maybe I might have trouble breastfeeding. So from the moment my daughter was born, we had skin to skin for 3.5 hours straight with no interruptions, and she was breastfeeding from side to side. She had a really good latch, so I was super fortunate for that, and it wasn't painful at all. So in the hospital, because she latched so perfectly, even the midwives were commenting on how well she was latching and suckling. All the doubt that I had prior to giving birth just went away, and I thought, I've got this. My daughter and I were working together, and I just was really, really confident in a positive breastfeeding journey ahead. Yeah, day one, she latched fine, no pain, and I started to just hand express a bit of colostrum just so that I could see it coming out. And it was. So again, super happy, and I was feeling on top of the world. I continued breastfeeding from one side to the other for the next couple of days, as you do, just so that for my daughter to try to bring my milk down. And it was day 3, and I woke up and my boobs were completely engorged. Me, because I wanted to breastfeed so badly, when I woke up, I thought, my milk's in, here we go. Honestly, I almost cried of happiness. I thought, I've just had the birth of my dreams. There is nothing that I would change about my birth. If you haven't watched my birth story, I will link in the description below, so go check that out. But I had the birth of my dreams, and then now my milk's come in, my daughter is feeding, she's latching fine, I've got no pain. Obviously hormones were playing a big part in how I felt, but I just felt on top of the world, and I felt so happy that I was about to start my breastfeeding journey. After every feed, my boobs were still extremely engorged. Now, I thought from what I had learned that once the baby has a feed, then your boobs will, go down somewhat because the milk has come out, and then they will fill back up again, right? So they're drained, filled back up, and then, feed again. This wasn't happening for me. So as I said, it was day 3. They were really engorged. She was feeding from one side to the other. Again, no pain, no nipple trauma. Everything seemed fine. I was sort of hand expressing so I could see that something was coming out, but they were super engorged. Now that night, it was one of the worst nights. So my daughter pretty much screamed for 3 hours straight. And I just thought it was all part of the cluster feeding. So she would feed, she would maybe settle for like a couple of minutes and then scream again. So then I put her back on the boob. She was literally on my boob the entire night. But after 3 hours, she eventually went to sleep. And I thought, oh, maybe she's full. But looking back, I think she might have just been exhausted. So then the next day, day 4, again, my boobs were super engorged. I was massaging them all the time. I was in the shower, and I just thought that I just need to put her on the boob more to drain them out. But no matter how many times I put her on the boob, they just continue to remain engorged. So day 5, I just continue the same cycle again, feeding from one side to the other. And then that night, she screamed for 5 hours. So she's gone from 3 to now 5 hours, and it was horrible. And I just thought, like, there's something not right. Like a baby doesn't just scream and cry for no reason. Well, that's what I thought, and that's what I still truly do believe to this day, that my daughter was trying to tell me something. Then the next day, it was, I think, technically day 5. And my boobs had gone back to the size that they were prior to falling pregnant. Now, I woke up with the worst anxiety and stress from this because I've gone from having engorged boobs, thinking my milk's there, my daughter's feeding, and all of a sudden, just nothing. Looking back, and at the time I didn't think this, but it was like the milk came in, but it just wasn't draining properly. So because it wasn't draining properly, it told my body not to produce anymore because it doesn't really need to be drained. So I think that is what happened. I don't know. It's all still a guessing game to me. But anyway, so yeah, that day 5, and that was one of the worst days ever, but I still wanted to continue breastfeeding. I thought, no, I've got this, like I can do it. So I continued feeding. This day my daughter was actually a lot more sleepy, so she slept quite a lot. And at the time, again, you're so tired, you're so hormonal. I'm a first-time mum. I didn't know, right? I had my midwives coming out, but look, they are midwives. They specialize in taking care of the woman. I needed a lactation consultant. I really needed a lactation consultant to come and help me. But again, hindsight's a great thing. I didn't ask for it at the time. I wasn't offered it. I just thought that maybe I could do it on my own. My daughter had also lost a bit of weight that I could see. Now, we hadn't had her weighed yet, but just looking at her, I could tell she had lost a bit of weight. And as well, and I know weight is obviously one indication of if they're getting enough milk, but also her poo had not changed color yet. They obviously are black at the start, and then once they start getting milk and colostrum through them, then it changes color, and it hadn't changed color yet. Her wet nappies, there was like sort of a little bit of yellowy, orangey kind of spotting, which is not a good sign either. So yeah, as you can imagine, I was an absolute mess because I got in my own head and I thought, well, I've just been starving my daughter for the last sort of 5 days. Well, that's what I thought anyway. So it was a really, really horrible time for me. But then probably the worst day of my entire life was the next day, which was day 6, and this is weigh-in day. I had so much worry and anxiety about this day because I knew My instinct was telling me something wasn't right, but I just wanted to breastfeed exclusively so badly. But anyway, so yeah, weigh-in day. So I had a midwife come around. It wasn't my usual midwife because it was a weekend at this stage. And she came over and was having a look at her. They look at loads of different things, do different checks, and yeah, it kind of got time to the weighing, and she got the scales out and put my daughter on there, and it was heartbreaking. I honestly had another meltdown. I'm not going to go into how much she actually lost, but it wasn't healthy, and yeah, she needed some milk to be in her little tummy so that she can start putting on weight again. I won't go into all the details of sort of what was said, but from here she suggested that I start pumping, and she suggested that I start doing formula top-ups. Each feed took around 2 hours because I would breastfeed, then I would be doing a bottle top-up. So whether that be the formula or the breast milk that I had expressed from the feed before, and then I would pump. It was at this point that I regretted not having a double pump. I actually had a single one, so it would be 10 minutes on one side, 10 minutes on the other side. But again, I didn't know that this was going to be my journey, and I did not expect to be pumping this early on. I thought I would just have a pump there just in case I wanted to get a little bit extra milk. Other things I was doing is I was trying to eat as much food as I could, because obviously the more you eat, that can help your supply. I was drinking loads of water. I was taking brewer's yeast. My midwives actually recommended that I take Metilium. I was pumping as much as every second of the day I was consumed by my supply and pumping. I was obsessed with watching how much I would pump each feed. All I did was feed, pump, and just cuddle my daughter, and that was my life. I just wanted to do everything I could to build my supply. So as you can imagine, I was extremely exhausted. And also keeping in mind, all this happened 6 days postpartum. So I was so hormonal, I was so tired, I was emotional, I was all the feels. But on top of all of that, I now have the added stress of my supply and my feeding issues, and just feeling like that there's something wrong with me. Like, why can't I just feed my baby? Honestly, just felt like a failure, and I developed really bad anxiety, and if I'm being honest, I was in a pretty bad mental state at the beginning. So anyway, I continued this 2-hour feed cycle, so breastfeed, bottle, and then pumping for the next 3 months. And my milk, it did increase, absolutely it did, but still not enough to be exclusively breastfeeding. I still did have to do formula top-ups, but majority of the milk she was consuming was my milk, which I was so happy for, not just purely through breastfeeding, but also through the pumping. But as I said, it was 3 months. It was so taxing on my mental state and my body. I was exhausted. So at this stage, I actually decided to not stop pumping completely, but not stick to it every single feed like I was doing. I was so obsessed with pumping that I would take my pump out with me if I left the house, because I just couldn't miss a pump. I had to pump because I had to build my supply. I had to exclusively breastfeeding. I just had all this pressure on myself. So yeah, it was obviously got to the point where I just physically couldn't pump like I was pumping for those 3 months. So as the time went on, I slowly started to stop pumping, and then of course in turn my supply decreased even more. But I can happily say, and I cannot believe it, that me and my daughter made it to 10 months breastfeeding. How my journey started to me and my daughter becoming this far, I'm so proud of her for sticking with me. I'm so proud of myself for sticking at it. And I'm really, really proud of our achievement. Of course, I've always had to mix feed and have formula, but you know what? My daughter is healthy, she's happy, we have a beautiful connection, she's obsessed with breastfeeding. Even now, my milk is pretty much gone, but she just wants to be on the boob for that comfort. So, you know what? I know I've done something right, and I can look back and know that I gave it my absolute all to do the best that I could to try to increase my supply. So that is my breastfeeding journey and my mixed feeding, combination feeding, whatever you want to call it. But I just hope that me sharing this will help you through your journey. Now, there are a couple of things that I would have done differently and some things that I wish that I had have known. So I'm going to share these with you in the hope that it might be able to help you through your breastfeeding journey to come. Tip number one, and I've said this in another video, and that is to book a lactation consultant for the day after you get home from the hospital. Whether you've been in the hospital for 5 days or 1 day, either way, book a lactation consultant for when you get home, because I do truly believe that this would have been a significant impact into my breastfeeding journey if I had have done this when I got home from the hospital. Tip number two, and that is I regret not pumping. Now, I know what you hear and what you read is do not pump in those first few weeks because you don't want to get an oversupply. But for me, I actually think I should have started pumping the day my milk came in, because it obviously wasn't being drained properly, so it told my body not to produce it. So I think if I had have pumped, then my supply would have been impacted in a positive way. Now, this obviously isn't for everyone, but for me personally, my gut was telling me to pump, but I thought, no, you're not meant to pump. You're meant to just put the baby on your boob. But I do regret doing this. So if you are feeling like maybe I was or in a similar situation, maybe consider pumping. Another thing, and that is for reach out for help. I, again, didn't, and it was all a little bit too late when I reached out for help and I started speaking to lactation consultants and going to appointments and all of this. It was all a little bit too late, and my supply, no matter what I did, it never got to the point for me exclusively breastfeeding. But I wish I had have reached out for help in those first few days. So make sure you ask for help, because if something doesn't feel right, it probably isn't. The next tip, and that is to do your research on the formula that you would like to buy. Now, if you go into your breastfeeding journey and you don't wanting to use formula, that's exactly what I wanted as well. I didn't do any research on the type of formula that I was wanting to use. So when it comes to the time that I had to buy a formula, now just remember that I'd just gone through a traumatic experience by my daughter's weight and my supply, all of that. So now I'm at the shops trying to buy a formula and trying to do research, and it was so overwhelming. I didn't know which one to pick. So make sure you do that prior. The next thing, and that is make sure you have some bottles. I didn't. I had no bottles. I, again, thought I would not be needing bottles until later down the track. So I had to go out, buy all the bottles, buy the sterilizers, buy the bottle warmer, all of that stuff, which is so exhausting and overwhelming. So make sure you have at least a couple of bottles ready to go in case you need to use them. Another thing, and that is to have a pump, or have your pump at least set up. Mine was in the box. I didn't have anything ready to go. So when it came to the time that I had to use the pump, my partner was setting it up. I was stressed. It was just, it was overwhelming. And these things sound so simple when you're in a really good headspace, but when you're not, anything feels really overwhelming and exhausting. So make sure you have these things set up, ready to go in case you need to go down that avenue. For some reason, when it comes to breastfeeding and formula feeding, everyone has an opinion on it, and everyone is so judgmental. So many days that I would just be crying about my supply.